Hello. How's everybody doing? How has everybody been? Hopefully good. Hopefully everybody's, doing great, doing fantastic, and applying themselves and doing the types of things that they already have been accustomed to doing. Before they got saved, during their salvation, and before obviously they began praying some of the prayers that they actually ended up praying that overcomplicated the process of actually bearing fruits and, other things like that. In short, you just need to go back to how it used to be before you actually prayed and pray those certain prayers and just get inside of that little mentality of you actually being able to, act as if you never prayed any of those prayers, because it's just a mental issue and it's getting to your head. Sadly, you're overthinking the situation, and because you're overthinking the situation, you're not actually able to recognize that you're just making an enormous deal out of it, when in reality these types of events and situations have been happening to you all of your life, and only because you actually prayed for it, you began to actually recognize that God did in fact answer the prayer, or more or less you embedded in the idea of the prayer being answered, even though it was already happening, in that little phenomena was happening in your life, right? And then it's like, well, what is going on? And I don't understand it. And now this stuff seems a lot more difficult, a lot more harder. I can't even do it anymore. I used to be this good Christian, and now all of a sudden, I just suck. That's it. You just prayed for it, and now you're actually seeing it, whereas before you didn't notice it because you never asked. And right, joke's on you. So yeah, this video is just gonna be about the emotion aspect and the emotion side of things, because that just seems to be something that I'm heavily, experienced on, just because I already know what it's like to have my emotions toyed with, both before I got saved and during while I actually got saved, to try to practice biblical teachings and, principles to my lifestyles. Really detaching myself from the secular world that I was in short living, and the lies that I was obviously accustomed to hearing. And, basically, secular world just overemphasizes the fact that you need to be honest with yourselves. You need to be able to, uh, communicate what you actually are experiencing and feeling, and they take it the wrong way, right? As soon as they actually uh, begin to want to practice that way of thinking now, where you actually have to be honest with yourselves, automatically, anytime they feel angry, it all has to deal with I'm being honest with myself. Another types of, principles and scenarios like that from spiritual warfare perspective, you're able to manipulate an individual and get us out of an individual's head just by actually being able to convince them that everything they're experiencing and feeling is actually themselves. They like a lot of maturity, and due to the gospel itself having to deal with you actually maturing and growing and not doing the same old types of coping skills and mechanisms that you were doing when you were a little kid or a teenager. You're growing and you're advancing, you're maturing, you're applying wise scriptures. That's why that's a saying in our day and age, that that type of individual, or those types of teenagers that actually behave themselves like that are composed, are typically more mature than the other types of individuals. Same basis, same concept. It's not something strange to you. It's just that you haven't realistically applied it to what you should or what you need to. You're not realistically as mature as you thought. You're acting very immaturely for these circumstances and scenarios. Plus, obviously, I know individuals are actually able to influence your decisions, and prior to another person actually, telling you some horrible advice and giving you bad advice, you probably would have never acted out on any of those counsels of your quote unquote peers. But because of that, you got influenced, and peer pressure is a hell of a drug, right? And that's what you ended up doing. And oh well, too bad, so sad. You suffered loss in the kingdom of heaven, and you can't really do anything about it. So yeah, obviously in the past video I was talking about how the devils are actually able to manipulate emotions, good and bad emotions, negative emotions, positive emotions, anything that they could possibly try to get an advantage on the Christian and on the your relationship with Christ, and try to put a strain on it, to try to ensure that you and Christ aren't as close as you actually were when you first got saved. Things just begin to be a lot more difficult. You feel this oppression over your lifetime. You feel heavy, obviously in carnal terms like that, because you aren't actually aware, and you're too afraid to actually confront the spiritual and the demonic. You say things like, "Oh, I feel heavy." You're just being oppressed. Or according to the biblical standards, you have a yoke of complacency, self-satisfaction, and heaviness over your head, and oppression. And these things in themselves come in the form of demonic entities and presences, as well as, being able to recognize and discern that every single thought that you actually have in your brain, whether it's retained information, good or bad, is all demonic. You could literally cast out all your bad thoughts out of your vessel like nothing, and that's just going to be the main principle that we're going to practice out right in this same exact video starting now. I want you to just begin, breaking these curses up and just casting out all these negative thoughts out of your head, whether it's outside or external forces that influence your decisions to actually want to deliver yourselves, or just obviously external forces that you're already susceptible to be influenced towards, as these are going to be the main things. They're like bear traps in the forest, and you're a little bear and you always fall for these little traps, or a little cub, right? You're a little cub, and because you don't know any better, you always fall into these traps, and mama bear has to get you out of these situations, and mama bear being Jesus Christ himself. So obviously, I'm just going to bring awareness as to why you need to be able to control your emotions, to tame your emotions, and to be able to discern what is really going on and what is really happening, to really confront the issues for what they actually are, instead of you just sugarcoating it for yourselves because you're too afraid, or you don't think that Christ is going to back you up. Obviously, you have placed more faith in the devil than you have placed in yourselves. None of yourselves, sorry. You have placed more faith in the devil than you actually have placed in Christ and in God himself. And because of that, you don't want to fight the enemy at all. It's a sin. You need to ensure that you are grounded and actually having that level of faith in God the Father, or obviously you already have chosen your Lord and your Master, and it's the devil. So obviously that's going to be the main purpose of it all, is to detach yourself from that sort of level of faith that you have in Satan and the enemy and his angels and other things like that. That way you actually are able to recognize how much of a sin it really is, or else you'll never get out of it. Sadly, that just seems to be the main issue, as well as that individuals just sugarcoat sin, and because of it, they remain in sin and they never bother getting better or anything like that, or even have that level of urgency to actually get rid of those flaws and destructive patterns and habits that they consistently fall into. All has to deal with themselves being complacent and self-satisfied, and they're just really comfortable in their sin. And the same as principle as when you recognize an individual who hasn't showered or is just dirty or something like along those lines. You're able to smell them and they have like mud all over their face. This is like the same exact thing. You're just wallowing around in your own filth, and feeling proud about it, and nobody can decide or to change your mind that you need a shower or do certain things like that, sadly. But still, the main premise and the whole point of this video itself is to actually be able to get you to not be so ignorant as to what is actually happening inside of your life, and the devil is actually being able to manipulate the easiest means through your emotions. And you being ignorant, you think that God is going to protect you from all of these things. That's not at all what's happening. First things first, obviously the demonic exists. That's going to be the main, type of practice I'm trying to get you to really get out of, and to really get yourselves out of that way of thinking of not being able to confront these sort of situations, or honestly you're never going to get better. You're going to continue beating around the bush and just avoiding these things entirely, reading the scriptures and trying to beat the same old types of scriptures in your heads, when in reality these things themselves are just demonic, right? You got to fight spiritual battles. You don't just put on the armor of God and just sit there and do nothing with it. You obviously have to put this armor to use, or it's pretty simple to understand. And yeah, but so first things first, right? The demonic exists. What are the demons, able to do and capable of doing? They're able to stir your emotions up through, counterfeit spirits. They're able to, make you feel this sense of worth and praise to the Lord Jesus Christ, but with a twist. It obviously has you focused on yourself and what you actually are experiencing, instead of focusing on Christ himself. or they try to give you a counterfeit worship spirit, but all of it has to deal with how it makes you feel. All of it has to deal with you. It's all vain, it's all vanity, and that's the easiest way and the means to be able to tell whether it's demonic or real worship. Real worship is obviously going to focus on the creator, and it's going to be a detachment of yourself entirely. It has nothing to deal with you yourself. What these things themselves actually make you feel, what you actually are experiencing, just because of the overall fact of when you do meet Jesus Christ in heaven or down here on earth, do you honestly think that you're going to be so enveloped in your emotions and in your feelings? Obviously not. You're just going to be so in awe and in amazement as to who is really before your face right there, right then and there, right? And obviously you're just not going to be so centered and focused on those sort of things themselves. You're going to be focused on who's actually there. Emotions are not really something that you're concerned about. It's in the moment type of thing, right? You're just like, wow, I can't believe this is really happening. The individual that was basically raising me all of my life and helping me out and was with me through all my trials and tribulations, this individual is right here. So obviously I'm trying to ground you in worship and trying to ground you in that way of thinking. That way you actually aren't so susceptible to you actually deviating yourself from taking your eyes off the creator during those very intimate and personal times, right? Because it's wrong and it's a sin if you actually end up getting into it. So yeah, demonic exists, right? And that's just one of the main things that needs to be understood within you, or you're just not going to advance any further from there. There's a reason why I actually mentioned that first. Second thing, what they actually are able to do and what they're capable of doing, they're able to stir up your hearts and to counterfeit, feelings of joy, experiencing these sort of things, and obviously anger, frustration, pride, irritation, annoyance, and tones of indifference. What else? Attitudes, bad attitudes, approaches, how you approach the gospel, how you approach these sort of messages. All these things themselves have to deal with sins, right? If you're not doing it in a manner that obviously is being influenced by is not being influenced by someone on this earth, and you just focus on pleasing Christ and pleasing God, and then you're going to consistently and always fall into sin. This is just something that Christ himself wanted me to understand as well. I'm just going to use this example. Every time that I actually mention Christ and I do talk to Christ, he always wants me to stand up straight and to prostrate myself, to upright. What is it? To go upright and to just, to straighten myself, my posture up every single time. He doesn't at all want me to slouch whenever he comes into contact with me, because he does appear to me as well as the Father, and I typically just don't want to actually talk to the Father whatsoever because he's scary. But yeah, obviously the Father does come before me, and the Holy Ghost seldomly. But definitely, Jesus Christ always reminds me and always tells me those sort of things themselves, to posture myself and to do that, and not to be so influenced by how other individuals just carry themselves, or how they just attempt to try to make it seem to be. He says, excuse yourself before you actually leave. But when you do talk to me and to do certain things like that, these things are very honorable before my eyes, and they have a lot of merit, and then you just continue doing these sort of things and let other individuals influence these sort of decisions when it has nothing to deal with them, and it has to deal with just something that is typically good. I'm the creator of everything, and here you are just acting like I'm just a common man. And I was like, okay, you're right. I'm acting really stupid like that, and I'm letting other individuals influence me, and more or less just letting them, it's not to say that I'm entertaining the thought, but it's like I'm saying it should be instinctively and impulsively, instead of me just and other things like that. But for the most part, I don't really do that. I don't really care what anyone else has to say, or just things like that. On top of it already automatically being a sin if you don't excuse yourself or prostrate yourself automatically. Sometimes I will tell Christ, like, I'm really tired right now. I'm really sleepy. And I'll be like, there's a demon on you trying to get you to be tired. I'm just like, oh, okay, sorry. And yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's just that. Influencing and ensuring that you actually are addressing these sort of individuals correctly and appropriately. uh what else? Third things, your emotions and righteous anger and feeling justified when you actually do experience these emotions. Man, honestly, that's a whole teaching in itself, and I might get into it right now or maybe a little bit later, but for the most part, I'll touch on it briefly and very, keep it very plain and simple for you to be able to understand. Just because of the fact that the devil is really conniving, very cunning and sneaky, I don't want individuals to be practicing righteous anger just because you don't have that level of intelligence and knowledge to be able to know for certain what that actually is. And because you don't actually know what it is, I just want these types of individuals and the people who actually do follow me, who do watch my videos or who do hearken to it, to just practice patience and self-control instead of uh, reacting or acting on those emotions of anger, frustration, annoyance, or irritation. Obviously, that spirit over the anger, as individuals, just typically just start saying, that it's like, well, it's all right to sin. It's all right to, well, it's not a right to sin. Sorry, excuse me, just scratch that word. That it's all right to feel anger as long as anger doesn't cause you to sin. That's what I was trying to say. And because of that, uh, yeah, that's the main premise and the whole principle of what I actually am talking about right now. Just because the devil, I already have experienced that as well. When he came inside of my life, he was basically coming as an angel of light, right, trying to convince me that I was experiencing righteous anger, and because of that itself, I was just like, because of that, I was a lot more. I was susceptible to those types of, angels of light that were coming inside of my life, and I was just, you know, I was basically learning that I need to keep it simple with these sort of things, instead of me deviating myself from Christ's commandments and His path to automatically just choose the right and to choose His teachings and sayings for these sort of situations that come inside of my life, instead of being so hasty and impulsive to automatically react according to my own judgments and according to my own uh, understandings on how I actually should react to these sort of situations. I need to just keep it simple and to just not deviate myself, again, from Christ's path and from His commandments themselves, because He's judge, He's ruler. Obviously, He's the master of my life, because I'm walking here on earth. And that's just going to be the overall premise. If you do actually hearken to these sort of messages, and you have been experiencing, frustration, anger, irritation, or some of these things themselves, I want you to just replace those sort of emotions and to just try to build it into a habit until you actually get it to that point where you just impulsively start practicing out patience and self-control for these sort of situations, because from that you're able to bear more fruit, and this in itself just branches off into you actually being able to be more compassionate, understanding, and obviously what is already written in the scriptures, that a fool is hasty and impulsive, and anger rests in the bosoms of fools. This is in Ecclesiastes, I think, chapter 5. But obviously it's typically praiseworthy, right, for you to not be so impulsive, for you to be patient and self-controlling of yourself and emotions. And that's just going to be the overall premise of it all. I mean, there's just so many different types of forms and reasons as to why you shouldn't actually react on the anger itself, just because you're just a man. And anger has to deal with so many more other types of practices themselves and sins that you aren't actually aware of, and you begin actually making these sort of sins into habits, and then it just spirals downhill from there, and it's like a snowball rolling down a mountain. And you're trying to again, it's the same exact principle as what I actually mentioned in the last video. Compromise after compromise, these obvious sins aren't as obvious as they were before, and you keep practicing these sort of sins, you keep going downhill and degenerating and backsliding, and it's just like, man, it's like you didn't even realize or recognize, or you were able to discern the type of road that you were essentially on when you actually began practicing these sort of works out, and really acting on your emotions and your anger, and realistically not recognizing the fact that it's all demonic and the spiritual exists, and you're being tempted, and you just didn't add that part of the equation to the formula. What is it? You didn't add that part to the formula, and this is the reason why your life is in shambles and a mess. Obviously it's understandable. You're not going to be able to take into consideration or account for every single thing that's going to happen inside of your life, but at least give it some effort to try to, include everything, and not be so naive and gullible, and so self-satisfied and complacent with these sort of things. There has to be some level of drive on your end to be able to want to, do these sort of things, and to want to continue learning and knowing more. Self-discovery is always good. You're able to discern and recognize the types of traps and scenarios you consistently fall into, as well as how stupid you actually are for falling into certain traps and sins, and things like that. I'm obviously referring to myself as well. I have to say these messages to me, myself, how stupid I actually fall into these sins. One of my main flaws, I would say, is definitely overly confident in these certain things. And then when things don't go how I think they're actually going to go, what ends up happening is just like, what the heck? I get confused. It's like, I'm also accustomed to actually, just winning these battles and winning these fights. And now here I am just on my face on the floor, and I just fell as what just happened. And yeah, I mean, these things are pretty basic and simple to be able to understand, especially pain. Pain teaches you some lessons, right? You could either learn the easy way or the hard way, but sadly for many individuals, you're just going to learn the hard way. And you could just pray for you right now, for you to actually be delivered. That way you actually do learn the easy way, because these things in themselves are just ask type of things, and you want to actually do these types of things, and it's like, okay, great, just hurry up and just ask it, and keep it simple, instead of you just overcomplicating these sort of what's the word? Instead of overcomplicating these sort of desires that you actually have, because I mean, that's all it is. But yeah, grace and peace be multiplied to you. The grace is to know what I'm saying, the peace to know that is sent from God, and the mercies to be able to receive these graces, and the love of the Lord Jesus Christ, and the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ reign in your hearts and be with you all. So basically, this whole video is just meant to actually be able to bring some awareness on your emotions. That way you're not so susceptible to the same old traps and tactics of the enemy that come inside of your life. I mean, just answer this question. Did you honestly believe that the devil is actually manipulating your own emotions against you? Probably not, in all honesty. You thought that Christ himself was actually, protecting you and guiding you, but he lets these things come inside of your life to be able to grow you and mature you. And because you're completely ignorant of that fact, you don't actually know what the intent of these, temptations are when they do come inside of your life. And all of it has to do with actually producing a mature character out of you to be able to grow and refine you. And sadly, most of you end up failing just because you don't even know the intent behind these sort of things themselves. Or maybe you did and then you ended up forgetting. But for the most part, this is why these sort of things end up coming inside of your life for that specific purpose, is just to actually be able to refine you and test you. I mean, obviously, Christ is your father. You could be able to, address him according to his godly, person, and to that type of character that he actually is in his being. But also he is your father, right? You could actually talk to him and tell him these sort of things with the level of confidence, and to be able to be like, you know what, I need help with these temptations. I understand that I have to engage in spiritual warfare, but please point me and help me in the direction that I obviously need for these sort of things, just because I'm obviously very ignorant. I'm barely learning these things. I know you're a rational spirit. Obviously, all these things are true, but you're just not actually able to vocalize it and to really communicate these sort of facts, and the level of foreknowledge you already have when you actually are going into these trials and tests and tribulations in your day-to-day lives. And because of these little principles and little things themselves, you overcomplicate these sort of issues, and what ends up happening, right? It's just like you're stalled out. You're waiting for an answer and a response from Christ, and in reality, these things are just as simple as you actually talking to yourself about them, and about these sort of situations themselves. And sadly, it does work to talk to yourself, and well, not talk to yourself, but to talk to Christ, as there seems to be a level of relief and peace when you actually do talk to him, or when you actually feel like you're talking to him, just because all of a sudden all the answers just seem to open up themselves to you, and you're just like, and you're actually able to recognize how foolish you've been acting and how irrational you've been. And that would be the overall principle and premise of that video, in this video itself, and just intent as to why, Christ actually ends up doing these things. You're heavily ignorant towards it, and the intent as to why and how Christ is going to put these situations inside of your life, and he uses anything and everything. That's just something that you need to be comfortable with, and comfortable with that idea that he's going to put anything and everything in your path, just because it works, and is able to keep you on your toes. You're actually able to recognize, and you're actually able to discern that this is God the creator, and he does whatever he wants and whatever he wills. I'm not at that level, and because of that, he's realistically really teaching you that you're just a servant. He's your master, he's your creator, and because of that, it really, grounds you, and it really keeps you level-headed, to be able to know and discern that he uses anything and everything. Obviously not everything is going to be pleasant, and some of these things themselves you could pray ahead of time to be able to avoid the unnecessary drama entirely, right? And those sort of things in themselves. But if you want to consistently just think that you don't have to pray for any of these things, or actually show Christ that you care concerning your salvation and your walk with Christ and your spiritual side, your soul, and other things like that, then obviously you're just not going to reap as many benefits, and you're just going to show Christ truly how much you actually care. You realistically really do have to show him how much you actually care for these things. Some of these are just not just, okay, God, I know you know everything, and that's it, and then you just go on about your day. Some of these things is just real, dedication, commitment, and hard work towards you actually being able to show Christ that you actually care about him, his overall agenda, his kingdom, and his goals for your life and for other individuals' lives especially. That has to be the first priority for your life, is to be able to put others before yourselves and their goals and Christ's needs for their life. Or it's like, man, how are you supposed to learn compassion? How are you supposed to learn so many other biblical teachings and teachings of Christ if you're just always you, right? It's never, other individuals. You're always focused and centered on yourself. You don't realistically have that level of, good character to be able to put others before yourself, and being polite and courteous and other things like that. You let emotions get in the way. You don't actually address the spiritual side of these things. You're not realistically living at peace. Sadly, you want to have this level of, a connection and intimacy with Christ, but you're not realistically acting out or practicing any of his virtues or qualities or characteristics that he has, and that he already has touched from the Gospels themselves. And like-minded individuals definitely always do hang out, right? Birds of a feather flock together. That's the saying that we have in our day and age. And you just have to get to that level and to that point to be able to acknowledge that very basic, principle, to be able to have that level of connection with Christ, and to be confident to know that you actually are talking to Christ, and that you actually are reconciled and are on good terms with the Lord himself. Or that needs to be your priority every morning, in all honesty. And that's something that I want you to practice right now and right away, is to talk to God, talk to Christ, and to ensure that you actually are reconciled with them in this very moment, and to ask him, are we on good terms, and what can I do to please you, to ensure that we actually are on good terms, because I don't want to act blindly and react to these sort of situations. And I don't care what other individuals have to say, or I'm not going to let other people influence my decisions on what me and you actually have, correct? And obviously that's more important to me than what other individuals have to say. And sadly, you do have to confess these things until you get it embedded inside of your head what's really important, and you just begin instinctively acting these things out, which is good, right? And this is something that Christ himself has been wanting. He's been wanting this level of growth out of you for a pretty long time, but you just weren't catching on, and that was just the main issue of it. But for the most part, these things just get easier and simpler with time. The types of levels and tests that Christ just throws in your life take different forms, but for the most part, the overall theme is still there, and the overall principle of it all is still basically there. But if you're just so accustomed to having the same types of tests over and over again, until you actually do fail, or the test is finally over, you're gonna be like, oh wow, it's just the same old test of loving your enemies, and patience and self-control and other things like that. And because of those sort of principles themselves, me actually being accustomed to actually receiving the same types of tests over and over again, Christ basically got me, very comfortable with the idea of these tests being just normal, and expecting, these sort of same types of tests in that form. And then it didn't come in that form. And what ended up happening, it was just, that was the easiest means to be able to test you, as well as to be able to get you really comfortable. And what's the word? I do this all the time, for the kingdom of darkness, but this is like more spiritual warfare, where I try to make it build into a habit. That way, when they actually are, what's the word? To build it into a habit, right? That way, when I do, and I am able to switch it up, and they're already automatically accustomed to quote unquote winning, or thinking that they're winning, and for them it's actually a hard habit to knock off, and they just consistently and continually just doing the same old types of tactics that realistically have never gotten them anywhere. And it's just all a part of my plan and all a part of my ploy. And that's just basically what Christ ends up doing, right? It makes it into a habit to the point that you automatically, instinctively do the same old things over and over again. That way, it's that much more difficult for you to actually be able to act out the same types of tests that you were actually practicing, passing on a regular basis and consistently. But, these are very, keen and subtle things that Christ himself, clever things that Christ himself just throws inside of your path, to be able to acknowledge the spiritual warfare side of things, to be able to teach you that sort of things and that sort of light, and to be able to guide you as well, and to refine your character. So obviously, God being God, Christ being Christ, he's really smart, right? He's really wise. It just shows you actually how he actually is able to use everything to teach you for everything that you in short have been neglecting, which is still pretty bad, neglecting and neglection of other things that you can't neglect because it's a sin, is wrong and is still bad. So because these things are sins in themselves, you need to make sure that you aren't so negligent towards which you can't afford to be negligent on, just because it's going to cost you your life and your soul. And I mean, the very real principle and the basis of it all is that you're going to end up going into the lake of fire if you don't actually practice Christ's virtues in the forms that they actually come in. And because you don't view it like that, because you're so accustomed to doing these sort of things themselves, you're unaware of the types of sins that you're actually in, because you aren't obeying Christ in those sort of aspects and in those sort of forms in your life that they actually took. And so you were in sin the entire time. So obviously it's able to bring some level of awareness in your life, as well as being able to teach you, there's a consistent growth, right? And there's this eternal progress that you're consistently moving to, that you're consistently moving towards. There's not just, I got it, I'm on this little plateau right now and I'm going to stay like this for the rest of eternity. It's like, well, not really, you have to consistently still be trying to look for the crumbs on the floor, and to ensure that there's not even, what is it, it's a type of saying, when you actually end up cleaning the entire house, or leave no stone unturned. And another thing is like that, the Jewish people on Passover, they have this, obviously, they can't have any leaven in their house at all. All the cereal goes out, it gets thrown out in the garbage, or they eat it beforehand, before Passover begins. Then they go and they do this deep cleaning, like spring cleaning or whatever, and they try to get rid of all the little crumbs of leaven and everything else in between, right? That has to do with yeast and whatever rises inside of their home. And obviously these are the same types of principles. And they basically go around with a magnifying glass trying to get rid of all these things. I know it sounds silly or it sounds funny, but this is just what they actually are doing. And if they aren't actually able to get rid of all the chametz, they say, well, Lord, we nullify all the chametz that we aren't actually aware of getting, and we weren't aware of. And yeah, that's the type of level of virtue that you need to be practicing out for these sort of commandments of Christ, that you aren't actually, you have to be consistently looking for these things, and not just getting so complacent and being at that level of Christ and nullify all of the forms of disobedience that I actually am acting out in my life. Obviously, that sounds stupid, right? You wouldn't ever do that, but yeah, you individuals just, confess that through actions because of your complacency and no drive whatsoever to get better and to learn, refine, to learn more wise sayings and wisdom, and Proverbs and other things like that, and Ecclesiastes and Ecclesiastic is, and there's no real motivation or no real ambition to be able to really grow and advance to bear more fruit and to learn more virtuous characteristics and qualities for yourselves to practice them out in your daily day-to-day lives, right? And just do things that just obviously belong to Christ and characteristics that belong to him, because you're obviously all created in his image. Again, I already mentioned in the past video how the main reason why Christians are actually able to get out of that hole of flesh and the sins that they're struggling with is because they haven't saturated themselves in the word of God and in wisdom itself and in teachings. It's just because of these individuals that they actually have knowledge of sin and those sort of things themselves. They don't know how to actually be able to they don't know the remedy for their struggles, and because they don't know how to actually react to these sort of situations, they don't have a means to be able to cope with these sort of situations in a healthy manner. They're completely lost and struggling, and they're heavily ignorant towards it. And because of their ignorance, they continue, in their sin. And I've been there also. I've been there when I was younger. I was like 19 or 20 years old. And, I wanted to be this type of individual that was able to make my mother happy and to just do things like that. But I just didn't know how. And she would be telling me, I want you to show me that you care. And I just didn't know how. I was like, I don't know what, you should automatically know that I do care. And that wasn't until up until 2 years ago or a year ago where I was actually able to understand and come at that level where I was actually able to know what my mom was actually talking about. Like, she wants me to actually show her these sort of things in themselves. And it was just like, wow, I was just so ignorant and so had so much lack of knowledge in my life during that time. And that, I was just operating under the basis that you already know, which is what the main issue and main problem for many Christians that are actually walking with Christ and want to have and desire that level of connection and intimacy with him, is just because of the fact that he already knows, right? He already knows my heart and certain things like that. And it's like, well, you're kind of missing the point. You have to be able to show him that you actually do care. You have to be able to show him that you care every single day in the same exact manner as how when you first got saved. It's kind of like a boyfriend and girlfriend type of situation, but obviously keep these things pure. Right? He is your father. He is God. He is in love with you. And because of these sort of principles themselves, you need to be able to really equate it inside of your mind that he isn't the type of individual how you would actually encounter other people on the face of this earth. He's obviously obsessed with you because he's your father and because he knows every single thing about you, which is just something that you need to be able to acknowledge and recognize. And while, yes, there's certain things about you that he knows that you actually need to get rid of, he isn't the type of individual that's going to throw these things inside of your face. Remember that it is the devil who actually accuses people. And because it's the devil, this is a characteristic and quality of the devil. This is not a characteristic and quality of God himself. All he's focused and centered on is being able to ensure that you actually are always focused on the remedies, and that's it, and to just always be focused on wisdom, wise sayings, because these are actually going to produce a more beneficial character growth and development out of, on your end, right? You're actually going to be able to acknowledge and know for certain that this is the correct way and the right when you actually are more focused and centered on wise sayings, fruits, and teachings of Christ, instead of you just consistently being down and out and just always in that way of thinking. There's some level of direction when you actually are focused on Christ's commandments, instead of you just sitting down waiting for an answer how to be able to quit struggling with these sort of situations that are in your life. And yeah, that's something that Christ himself taught me in 2017. Wow, that was 6 years ago. And that's something that he taught me in that time. And I was basically coming to that level in knowledge, to be able to always be thinking about good works, because obviously God is never going to not tell you not to do something good. And obviously when I was basically practicing those sort of things out, I was just, getting into, I was testing the waters, right? And I was getting into that level of knowledge as to why these things are just typically good. And I was just passing it along to the other individuals that came on my page. And it was just pretty basic, simple principles like that, and individuals were actually able to understand and grasp it, which was great and wonderful. I was more or less excited about it. I didn't necessarily care about anything else or theology or doctrine, but obviously I tell the story a lot. That was the main issue and premise, and because it was so beneficial to me, this is why I say it so much and so often. That way you actually are able to practice and experience it for yourself, and to just be able to recognize I'm not rambling or just speaking these sort of things, but I'm genuinely speaking out of my own experience, to be more focused and concerned about the fruits themselves. I mean, spiritual warfare is just an obligation for every individual who is in the body of Christ, but this is the overall what's going to produce that eternal character and a mature character for yourselves and for your lives, which is something that Christ himself has been desirous of even before you got born, before I'm saying it like that to be more poetic, but even before you were born and before these sort of things themselves, this is something that Christ himself has automatically planned and destined every single individual who would take his salvation and his atonement for their lives to be able to walk in those sort of works and those good works for their lives. I mean, they're pretty basic principles to be able to understand and to grasp, and because they're so basic and simple, anybody can do it. Children can do it, older gentlemen and other types of individuals like that can do it, teenagers and toddlers and other things like that. They already are operating under those same types of principles because they're already listening to their mom and dad, and that's all they realistically know, and they continue with their level of virtue until they finally are older and they reach that level of accountability and that age of accountability and understanding, and that's why Christ actually ends up benefiting from these sort of individuals 10 times more than the other individual who's just like all about doctrines and theologies, because obviously they've chosen their path, right? And they get so enveloped, and the devil just destroys their soul and distorts their soul through so much through these doctrines and through these philosophies, and individuals don't actually recognize how another person is able to benefit a lot more from the gospel than they are, and it's just because of the route that they in short have taken. And what did Christ say? It was a crystal clear warning that he gave to anyone who wanted to be a Christian. Anyone who desires to be a Christian needs to bear fruit or be cut off and thrown into the furnace of fire. And obviously this is a real warning for everyone. Theology is not fruit. And that's something that you need to understand. Theology is not a replacement of fruit. What was I mentioning earlier in this video? I was mentioning how anger needs to be replaced by self-control and patience. God is not at all going to be angry with you if you don't actually act on these emotions of anger. On the contrary, God is going to be very happy and excited for you that you are finally choosing to replace anger with spirit, with patience and self-control. The fact that you actually think that Christ is actually going to be mad at you if you actually stop supposedly lying to yourself, you don't actually act on those sort of emotions. It doesn't even have to deal with you lying to yourself. It automatically has to deal with you actually replacing your destructive habits or something that could be potentially destructive, and not giving the devil a foothold whatsoever, and be practicing out those sort of virtues for your life. What is more praiseworthy to you? What is more praiseworthy to you? For somebody to not act on their anger into sin and let sin be brought inside of their life through anger, or for them to actually not even be fazed to the point it doesn't even cause anger because they're already practicing self-control and patience and other virtues and characteristics like that, forgiveness, what was the other one? Meekness and humbleness, humility, and other types of virtues and characteristics like that. I mean, obviously the other one, right? The second one. And that just seems to be something that individuals that are spiritual need to be, and they will be gravitating towards, to be able to practice those types of philosophies out for their lives. That way they actually are able to mature, grow, and just do something that is typically pleasing. And they're completely cutting the head off the snake, right? And they're actually able to really benefit them much more with Christ and the relationship and walk with him, and instead of them just consistently being like, oh well, this individual gets angry and I get angry, and then it just begins to be a problem, and I already know that I'm right, and the fact that this individual gets angry in these sort of situations just gets me that much more mad because I know I'm right, and other, obviously other stupid things like that, right? It just brings so much more drama, and then you start saying and repeating these things. Yes, you're right. I can get angry, but I can't let it cause me to sin. It's like, okay, I'm just gonna relax and do other things like that. You're missing the overall point of that. That scripture in itself is not meant to keep you in that same way of thinking until you're 55 years old or 65 years old. How would you look at 55 years old still doing that same type of principle out, and practicing that one out, instead of you realistically really being more composed, being patient, and having some sort of temperance and self-control in your life, and instead you just consistently just do the same old types of things with no real growth and maturity out of your vessel and out of your character. Obviously, it looks very bad in Christ's eyes, right? If you've been 20 years old still practicing it out and still getting angry at the same situations that got you angry when you were 35, and obviously what I was actually going to talk about earlier, the righteous anger side of things, and, because of spiritual warfare and because of how cunning the devil actually is, how he's a roaring lion watching everyone and seeking whom he may devour, and other types of little stupid principles like that, right? That we're all accustomed to, that we unfortunately have to deal with in this lifetime. It's just that the righteous anger scripture itself always gets twisted, and because you're very ignorant towards what is righteous anger, what isn't righteous anger, I just want you to completely and totally avoid it for now, until you actually are able to gain some sort of knowledge as to what is righteous anger, after you actually are practicing what I just mentioned down in this video. Or you're always going to fall flat on your face, and the devil's going to take you for a wild ride, and you're going to think that you're actually acting this sort of righteous anger out in the same exact manner as how individuals in the Old Testament did what they stoned they stoned the real prophets of God, thinking that they actually had the zeal for the Lord and that God was looking down on them, smiling from heaven, and other things like that. And honestly, that's just what I'm trying to avoid as well, is to ensure that you don't kill innocent people, and that you don't actually get into arguments or discussions with individuals that are really sent from God. And I'm avoiding that situation entirely for your lives because it's avoidable, right? If you just are actually able to avoid it until you actually gain that level of discernment and knowledge as to what is righteous anger. It's not that I don't have that much confidence in you, or I feel like this or that concerning your walk with Christ, or you're not that knowledgeable or certain things like that, and because of that I don't want you to actually touch it. It's just the fact that I already know how cunning the devil actually is, and that he's actually able to convince you and to really influence your decisions in your walk with Christ, and then you're not even going to realize what he actually is doing, because you're not a man of war, and you don't actually engage yourselves in that level, in that state of mind for yourselves. And me, because I already have put this stuff to practice, it's not that I'm gullible or not as gullible as yourselves. I already have come to the knowledge and understand that the devil will use anything and everything against you, and if you actually let him do those sort of principles themselves, then he's obviously going to get away with these sort of things, right? So you obviously have to have that level of authority and that level of firmness in your faith to be able to ensure that you don't let any of these nasty little vile devils come near you, because of the fact and the premise that the devil comes to steal, kill, and destroy, and none of that never changes ever. Even when they actually do come inside of your life to tempt you to be able to refine your character, because Christ is the one sending them, they still have their overall goal and ambition inside of their minds, right? And I don't want you ignorant of it, and that way you actually are able to really put the pep to your step and really start moving at Christ's pace towards these sort of situations, as to getting rid of all these demonic presences inside of your lives. I already know you're going to be overwhelmed at first, just because you're actually barely putting it to practice, and because of that principle itself, it's going to be hard. And I've been there, whatever, and it is what it is. And but until it actually does get gets to that point, you realistically need to beat it inside of your head that it's a sin for you to actually get angry, and realistically really get that, to not justify yourselves as much as you would like to justify yourselves, and to really just view these things according to how Christ viewed them. You're just not Christ, in all honesty, and him flipping tables and him doing these sort of things themselves, there's always a more excellent way to even how Christ actually ended up reacting to these sort of situations, which is overall growth. Christ is not going to get mad at you if you somehow find a more excellent way than how he was actually acting on earth during his time on earth. He's going to be very happy for you and very excited for you, because that's a quality of Christ himself. And that's something that you need to be aware of, right? That he's not going to condemn you at all if you actually choose to be better than how he was while he was walking here on earth. So please understand that principle and premise, as well as his teachings as well. And also please be aware that you're probably not going to react better than Christ and how he actually acted just on the premise alone that not everything that he actually did while he was walking here on earth is written on on the books and in the gospels themselves is what I meant to say. But yeah, but whatever, Christ himself definitely is going to, is going to be happy about that sort of virtue that you're going to be practicing now for yourselves, is to do better than how Christ was doing while he was walking here on earth. Please apply that to your lives, because it's going to benefit you a lot more than you think. And you're going to, learn a lot more about how the kingdom of heaven actually operates, and learn things ahead of time before you actually end up going up to heaven, which is good, but it's possible, just have that level of faith to be able to know that it actually is possible, instead of you just consistently being on that level and thinking that whatever, I just do this, and if I see the results, then good. Don't have that, attitude or approach to it. Just continue with that same type of momentum as when you initially heard it, and just continue moving forward and asking Christ for help, and praying for help, and doing those sort of things to be able to continue with that momentum, and to gain more momentum, and to actually not be stopped, to be prepared for these sort of temptations and trials that are going to come inside of your life. But yeah, the overall premise and all this other stuff, right? The devil using your anger and using your emotions to be able to get you to sin, and to be able to use you for his agenda. That's what he's doing, and because you're heavily ignorant on it as to why and what he's actually able to do to you in your life, he's able to get you to destroy your own life through your own emotions. And because you don't actually tame your emotions, or you don't even recognize the absolute obligation and how crucial it is to tame your emotions ASAP and as soon as possible, because of actually being able to not give the devil the full hold anymore, you completely neglect it, right? And then you go into so many more types of trials, temptations, and problems and suffrages because of it. And that's just something that you don't understand yet. You don't even know why you have so many more problems than another individual and another person. It all has to do with how you actually have been handling these sort of situations. It has to do with how you actually been able to view certain commandments, and how you haven't been able to view certain commandments. You think that Christ just gave you these things as suggestions, but in reality he didn't give it to you like that. They obviously have these very same exact authoritative principles as the law of Moses and the Ten Commandments. Every single commandment of Christ needs to be viewed in the same exact manner as the Ten Commandments, or there's no point in you actually being able to be a Christian, because you don't even have that level of foreknowledge of actually being able to address Christ with the type of person that he actually is, and the level of authority he has. Instead, you're just like, well, whatever, once I get there, I'll get there. Remember Lot's wife? That's not a commandment. These are commandments, right? And these are virtues themselves, to be able to view them as commandments, and to not be so man, what is that word? Careless towards these, little orders that Christ himself gave to us. And yeah, I mean these things are really, it's so simple to be able to understand these sort of things. And then, because of your understanding of what I actually am mentioning, you're actually able to let go of how you actually have been reacting and coping with these sort of situations, and then you're actually able to practice these things out. But then, a lot of things end up coming into individuals' lives, end up forgetting, they end up not being able to retain the sort of information in the right times, or in the scenarios that I was actually referring to and talking about. And Christ does these things on purpose to be able to test the quality of your work, and to see if it's good stuff, or quenchable stuff that ends up burning and going straight into hell. And the decision is up to you, whether you actually have been making good use of your time, or whether you just think that these things are going to be easy please humble yourselves down towards these sort of tests and trials, because I can assure you that Christ is going to send these hard tests in your life on purpose to be able to show you that not every single thing is going to be as easy as you think. And because of certain things like that, it keeps you on your toes again. Like I mentioned earlier, and this is something for you to be able to acknowledge and recognize that Christ does whatever he wants. He already has that level of foreknowledge about yourself, and he hears your thoughts at all times. He already knows on top of that everything, and he knows how you actually are. And for you to just be like, well, whatever, it's easy, I'll just prepare for these things, and not think that Christ can just act his free will out because he is a person just like you're a person, to be able to throw something hard in your life, and then you're like, how am I going to get out of this? Would just be pretty foolish, right? That was another teaching that I wanted to get individuals to acknowledge and to be able to recognize as to why, these certain situations that coming inside of your life, and it has to do with Christ being a person, and he does whatever he wants. Sadly, he does very, mockful things, if that's a word, for individuals to be able to mock them to their face because of how they actually have been living and the types of destructive patterns that they're consistently falling into. That way you're actually able to recognize it, and other things like that, just to be able to bring some level of awareness as to who the creator actually is. But you don't actually think that he would do something like that. But trust me, all your suffrages are done in that same exact purpose. And how I react with those sort of things in themselves is just like, well, okay, I recognize my place. I know how stupid I actually have been acting and how stupid I've been all of my life. And I appreciate you actually being able to rebuke me and chasten me and certain things like that. And obviously, I do recognize that I need to be zealous towards it. I need to be grateful and appreciative of these certain things themselves. Because you don't have to tell me anything. You don't owe me a single thing. I'm not entitled to any of these sort of principles or any of these, blessings or benefits. And these rebukes are blessings in themselves, because you actually are able to grow and continually be reminded of there's that level of growth inside of your life and eternal progression that on your end, to be able to continue progressing and moving forward. And that's in short it. You are God's child. You are, Jesus Christ is your father, and because of that you have this role model and this example that you need to be able to acknowledge and to be able to be imitators of. It's a lot of those are some enormous shoes to fill. If you understand what I'm trying to say, right? It's just way too much of how good Christ actually is, for you to actually be able to acknowledge that you're never going to get to that point. Eternal progression means eternal progression. You're going to be able to acknowledge and understand what that actually means once everything is actually said and done. Eternal progression is forever. And then to be able to get to the point and the grand perfection of who Christ actually is. And all these other things in themselves, kids, children, food, entertainment, pleasures, delightness, learning, and virtues and other principles like that, are just going to be other means to be able to slow you down in this eternal progression. So yeah, what else was I talking about in this video? Emotions and being able to tame your emotions, being able to recognize how important and crucial it is to not be so emotionally reliant. All right, so I tackled that, right? I said as to why, the how is how are you going to be less emotionally reliant. All of these things themselves have to deal with, curses, generational curses. Leviathan also has to deal with, curses of pride and anger. That's going to be the main reason why, if not the main reason why anyone actually does get angry, is because of pride. The more you actually are willing to confess it, the less you're going to be angry, and the more results you're actually going to see. Are you actually being able to really act out Christ's commandments for your life? I'm just going to tell you to confess it right now, right away, please. I just want to avoid that entirely, because you're going to end up going to hell either way if you just want to remain stubborn. So just do it now. Good. Yes. Yeah. It's pride. Wow. All stupid, right? I've been there also, but whatever. So just confess it right away. Yeah. And Some of you individuals inherited Leviathan, inherited pride, and certain things like that. And because you actually ended up inheriting these things, it made your lives that much harder and that much more difficult. It's going to make it that much more harder for you to actually be able to get rid of these demons and demonic presences in your life because they're curses. Or not, just kidding. That was a joke. You could break them through the cross. Yeah, now you could actually cast these things out like you've been casting other devils out of your life and out of your vessels, out of your mind, out of your heart, your soul, your will, and your emotions. Uh, as well as being able to cast out all of these thoughts, because that's just the form that they actually are. They're just demonic. Every single one of those thoughts that you end up hearing, every single thought you've heard all day, came from a demonic entity and a demonic being. And I'm casting all these things out ASAP. And I'm loosing these spirits in by the legion, the replacements of these wicked and evil things with remedies, right? Replacing the bad with the good. In Jesus Christ's name, amen. Love you. Thank you for listening. Bye.